they feel a religious void. They are part of our lives. They are the missing dots in our entire social lives.
The ancient foundries of Benin's royal brass casters, whose skills have been world-renowned for centuries, is where this unfinished story begins.
This process has been as old as the kingdom itself.
A once mighty kingdom, now part of Nigeria, whose bustling modern-day streets are still defined by the brutal invasion of the British back in 1897. Here in Benin City, that invasion is commemorated in life-size pieces of street art. But the world-famous symbols of Benin's past, the so-called Benin Bronzes, cultural artifacts which were wrenched from their homes, have still not, in the main, been returned to their original owners. And on the front line of all of this painful history, the British Museum.
And this one here.
Benin Bronzes were traditionally commissioned by the Oba, or king. Prince Eden Akenzua has been demanding their return for decades. In his personal library, photos the British took when they burnt his great-great-grandfather's palace to the ground, hunting for loot.
The British knew what they were doing.
Yeah. They knew there were precious objects here.
They knew they were looting.
Yeah.
Of the 3,000 artifacts they pillaged, many are now in the British Museum.
Those things are like our own diaries. Whatever was significant, the Oba would tell the guild of bronze casters to cast it in bronze, to keep a record. So taking them away was like yanking off pages of our history.
Despite Prince Akenzua's years of campaigning, the British Museum says no formal written request has been received for the return of the entire collection.
What does this mean?
Nothing, absolutely nothing. My brother, the father of the present Oba, he wrote a letter to the Queen of England.
He wrote to the Queen of England?
Yes, and there was a reply. So when the British are talking like that, that's nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Nigerians we've spoken to say there have been many formal requests made over the years for repatriation of the stolen Benin Bronzes. And we can exclusively reveal the letter Prince Akenzua says was sent to Queen Elizabeth in 1996. The British Museum say they don't have a copy of it, and Buckingham Palace refused to confirm whether they received it. The Oba's request to the Queen has never been published before. It reads, I'm aware that a substantial number of plaques and ivories are held in the Museum of Mankind, which was part of the British Museum. Return of the bronzes and ivories would also demonstrate that injustices perpetrated against African peoples are also being addressed. This is really exciting. Chief Ine is taking us to the foundry to see a process that has been going on for hundreds of years, techniques that are passed down over the generations from father to son. Chief Ine.
Yes.
This fire, what is in here?
So this is the furnace. Is it ready for casting? Okay. So this one is melted already.
That is hot.
Yes.
Hey. It's so fascinating to see the face and the features of this symbolic representation of an Oba literally being revealed before my eyes. This ancient technique lives on in these workshops, but the stories that were stolen in 1897 are now locked away in private collections and museums in Europe and America. Historic artifacts which trade hands for millions. It is a deeply symbolic legacy of British colonialism. Walk through Benin City's National Museum and the implications are stark. Most of the items here are in fact only replicas, modern copies. But in a huge breakthrough last year, the French and Germans decided they'd soon return some of their stolen bronze originals. Some British institutions also agreed. The most iconic collection of looted bronzes, however, over 900 still in the British Museum, are staying put.
We're tired of seeing photographs. We want to see the real thing. We're entitled to it because they belong to us.
Under current international law, it's the Nigerian federal government who has to make a formal request for return. And they have had enough.
If they claim they have not received any formal request, we will send them formal requests.
You will?
We will.
When will you do that?
Oh, as soon as possible.
Channel 4 News understands this letter has been drafted and will soon be on the British Museum's desk, ready for a key international meeting back in London in October. So, what do the British Museum say? They told us they work with indigenous communities, government institutions, museums and other bodies to, in their words, facilitate access to the collection. But what they're talking about is loans, not return, not ownership. And receiving the Nigerian government letter is very unlikely to be the end of it, because for the British Museum to return ownership, Parliament would actually need to change the law. It would need to repeal 2 separate Heritage Acts.
What would it mean to you?
To be like a dream fulfilled. To be like a dream fulfilled.
Benin, a kingdom which is determined to own its past. Nigerians say when their looted bronzes are returned, some will be loaned back, so scholars in Britain and Europe and America can continue to admire them. But for many people here, ownership is non-negotiable. Well, earlier I spoke to the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, and I began by asking him whether he thought the stolen Benin bronzes should be owned by Nigeria.
Well, I think that they properly reside in the British Museum. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't work with the government in Nigeria to see how we can share it with them.
Forgive me, and I understand sharing, but they were stolen. Do you not think that they should be owned by the people that they were stolen from in the first place?
Well, I think that the problem with this, and of course, if we go back to things that happened in the 19th century and judge them by our values of today, it's completely unacceptable. But my concern about this is, where do you actually draw the line with this? The collections of our great national institutions have been developed over many, many centuries, in many times in questionable circumstances. I think the question now is about what we do with these. I love the Benin Bronzes. I've seen them many times throughout my life, and I think them being in the British Museum, which is a world repository of heritage, allows people to see it. But that doesn't stop us from sharing it.
Okay, but ownership is key, right?
Yeah.
And the Nigerians say that when they get them back, they would almost certainly be happy to loan them back to you. But the fundamental problem is that they were stolen from the Nigerians and they want to own them.
I completely accept that they were acquired at a time of rampant colonial expansion in Africa, in circumstances that I'm not in any way going to sort of defend or condemn with the values of the 21st century. I think, though, the more important question is how we ensure that the world can enjoy this marvellous heritage.
A letter will soon be sent, mandated under international law by the Nigerian government to the British Museum, formally requesting return. You and I know that would also require laws, the Heritage Act and the British Museum Act, to be revoked or at least amended. Is that a realistic prospect?
No, we have no plans for doing that.
Okay, let me just bring us up to now. A lot of people say we are currently in a culture war. The phrase, the war on woke, if you like.
Yeah.
Some black people think that your government's policies actively undermine the lived experience of black people. What do you say to that?
Well, if you mentioned the so-called culture wars, I would actually take issue with that. I don't want us to have any wars about this. I want us to have a sensible conversation. What I've said in respect of contested heritage is that we should retain and explain. It's interesting you say about the views of Black Britons. A recent survey said that 84% of Black Britons actually supported keeping contested heritage.
A palace insider has told this programme that the Queen is a supporter in principle of Black Lives Matter. Are you a supporter of Black Lives Matter?
I am a supporter of ensuring opportunities for Black people, cracking down on racism. I don't support every last iota of the Black Lives Matter manifesto, as it were, but what I do support is making sure that we protect people from appalling racist abuse online. I frequently meet with Black football players on that, using my ministerial powers to improve the lives of Black people.
And when are we going to see action on social media companies clamping down on racism?
Well, that legislation is now in front of Parliament, so Parliament is scrutinising it. It's essential that we address it. But I'm not just doing that. Just yesterday, I met with the number 2 for Google globally, talking about what they can do in relation to YouTube. We have to address this because, having done so much work to stamp it out on the terraces, we cannot allow it to be normalised online. And the use of, the emojis, I won't even go into the details of it, all your viewers will be familiar with it. We've got to find ways of dealing with this.
Culture Secretary, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.